Yeah. What are you doing?
Wow. Hello, welcome to New Polity. Welcome to our fresh new studio. Welcome to The Politics of Tyranny, episode
Whatever.
9. 9?
Who knows?
We are
not really into counting, as we've gone over in an earlier
That's right.
episode.
A census of any sort. Merely knowing like your times tables makes me suspicious that you're a tyrant.
Yeah. Seems tyrannical.
Why do you have that information?
Yeah. Anyway.
So we're just here in Steubenville, de-educating our children and crafting ourselves into a cult. And before we invite you to join, we want to talk about one more mechanism of tyranny: population control. That's a big one.
Yeah.
That's one everyone I think thinks of. It's not like that weird liberty stuff we were doing.
Population control. Yep. Sounds scientific, though.
Yeah, that's true. I suppose so. I've been thinking about this a lot.
What's your position on science, Marc? Pro or con?
I love science.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
I just don't mean by it what people mean, and then I can have it. You know.
Sure.
It's like that's how post-liberal people tend to like rights.
But you're in favor of science. Good work. Okay, let's move on.
The population control, while yes, a certainly a more modern ring to it, does have its ancient precedents, we would argue. And I want to make the basic argument here that it is maybe one of the more fundamental necessities of tyranny. Like there's a little bit less of an option when it comes to population control, by which I mean the management of human reproduction.
Right.
I think
which is an important point. That we're not just talking about like numbers, managing the numbers. No. You're talking about the process of reproduction itself.
Well, reproduction, procreation, properly speaking. I don't actually think human beings reproduce.
Me either.
Right. You actually were the first to say that to me, but provided no justification.
Right.
And so then I thought for a year, and then I wrote an argument that human beings don't reproduce, which is actually really easy. You can read it on our website, newpolity.com.
Yeah. Let's not explain it, though. Go ahead.
You can be like me. No, we are, when we talk about the management of procreation, we are talking about, whenever I get back on track, I always say things like we're talking about become meta to the conversation. Like our mouths are moving in such a way so as to inform you that
you're just buying time.
I hate when I do that, but I do it all the time.
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
You're fine.
Procreation is a problem because if you're going to rule for private gain, then it's people that you're ruling. And that means you need people. Mm-hmm. Again, this seems completely obvious, but we've discussed the way that the tyrant always is getting his power through a series of manipulations and mechanisms over the whole society, and the whole society is participating in it. Mm-hmm. You don't get tyranny without everyone. And so one of the basic maintenances is you can't have a tyrant without other people. So there's a very material, there's a material necessity to procreation.
But there's the rub in that, isn't there? Because you need other people, but the creation of other people is precisely the setting at which untyrannical things are found.
Exactly. Yeah. The family is how you get new people, but the family is also how you get societies that have a totally different value system than the one of the tyranny.
Right.
So when we talk about population control, we're really talking about a tentative and warlike grasp of another power that the tyrant must take in order to properly be a tyrant. So you can think about this just in terms of, I tend to think about the Bible. I think about the Pharaoh in the Exodus story, having to manage the population of the Israelites. He lays out the problem very, very simply, namely that he needs to have the production of Israelites in order to build his various cities, but they're becoming too many, and he's worried that they at some point will have more power than him. And I should say that this can't just be a question of numbers. Like the fear cannot just be at some point there will be so many people that the tyrant will be overthrown, because it requires that it can't just be numbers. It has to be unsubjugated numbers in some way. It has to be people who are willing to enter into active rebellion. The power can't just be, there is no power in numbers unless those numbers are orientated towards a different good than that of the tyrant, and then those numbers become a de facto power.
But the having too many children is an interesting an interesting case there, because what you're saying, what you're getting at, I think, is that by having many children, the families themselves are becoming independent societies, and therefore a threat to the pharaoh. And so,
and I'm arguing that this is necessary, that you can't just have, like, what the family is cannot simply produce soldiers for an army. It cannot simply produce slaves for a tyrant, because the only way that you get functioning human beings is through love.
Yes, children have to be raised.
They have to be raised. It's not just a material production.
Right.
It's that the family is necessary to maintain in its integrity as a society in which power is orientated towards the weakest, namely the new child, with the goal of raising that weak person to the position of strength, at which point they don't need the various rules, laws, coercive tactics, and otherwise potentially tyrannical forms in order to be who they are.
So the problem of the tyrant is that he needs to figure out how to use what is the most fundamentally non-tyrannical form of power, which is parents over their children. He needs to somehow integrate that into a tyrannical form.
Absolutely.
Right? He has to, because there's no other way to come up with the human beings that he needs.
Yeah, and you can see in almost every tyrant in history, when we think about like the big guy tyrant, has this problem. So one place where you see maybe the closest to a direct attempt to take over procreation is within the technology that we call harem. So associated with tyrannies of the East, but I think present elsewhere, like ancient Assyrians, for instance. You have the desire of the tyrant to actually be the father of the majority of the children in a society, or at least the majority of the powerful children in the society. So you're quite literally going out. You're trying to make a super family, as it were, that you can direct against the regular procreating family. So that's an attempt to actually get into the family and make it for the sake of the production of servants.
Got it. So a harem society where
you enslave the women, and
then you're producing children from the king, who then populate his sort of power apparatus.
Yeah, princes, bureaucrats, administrators.
Right.
So that you take the loyalties of a family and you basically say, well, these belong to me in a more preeminent way than to everyone else. But most of the time that doesn't really work because, I mean, harems are notorious for just actually being like slaughterhouses of rivalry.
I was just going to say, all those children just end up killing each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
right. It doesn't work out. And so it does seem that more intelligent tyrants tend to try and find ways to preserve the love and service of the family, but kind of ride on it or extract from it the valuable thing, which is the functioning human being, which he needs, without that same power becoming a rival.
Okay.
To its
so
power.
How does he do it?
Well, I mean, I think the simplest way to put it is that since he has no power over procreation itself, or no useful power over procreation itself, he has to provide a reason to procreate or not procreate.
Got it.
So what I mean is, we've always spoken of the tyrant operating through systems of punishments and rewards.
Right.
So you have that de facto power you can bring to bear against a population of people. That's the manner in which you do it. You make it desirable for the reward to do your will, and you make it undesirable not to because of the punishment.
And these aren't just extrinsic, but they become internalized through the things we were talking about. We talked about norms, we talked about propaganda, we talked about fanaticism, we've talked about ideologies, that these systems of punishments and rewards are more socially complex than just like someone's going to slap your hand or give you a pile of money or something.
Yes. But what's fundamental is that for the tyrant, he needs to make the family procreate for the same kind of reasons that he needs them to procreate.
Yeah.
So one way we might say this simply is you under a tyrannical regime need to be convinced that you are producing children for the tyrannical regime, and
for the good of the regime.
Right. And that's a good.
And you have to think that's good.
And you have to desire it for yourself. It's funny because, and I bring this up to maybe frame it in a way that I sometimes hear Catholics speak like this, where you remember back when we were arguing about gay marriage, right? Before it just became like,
hold on, let me think about that. Way back. Oh yeah.
One of the arguments, and I was like I feel like I was in high school, but I was still horrified to find this, like the kind of Supreme Court arguments. One of the big arguments is like, we can't have gay marriage. We must have marriage as a natural institution because the state needs children.
Yeah.
And procreation provides the children, which is a definite sign that you're about to lose the argument, right? Yeah. Because obviously we can produce children through.
Yeah, it's a weird aspect of American law. Like the interests of the state become something that the lawyers have to argue in order to try to win. Yeah,
right, exactly. But that I think is maybe just a contemporary way to frame like what a tyranny needs is for that, frankly, I think ridiculous idea to become an actual virtue or a habit, at least a mode of thinking, a mode of being, a mode of operating within a people. To say,
so there's really sort of like obvious and kind of vulgar examples of this, for example, in fascist regimes or something in the 20th century, where to produce children for the fatherland becomes this highly honorable thing for healthy young women to do.
I know, and Catholic conservatives can be such a sucker for this whenever they see it, because they can be like, look, they're like pro-natalist, whatever. It's like, well,
actually, they're just making SS soldiers. Well, that's bad, but
it is acknowledging that in order to make SS soldiers, like they're doing the right thing because you have to preserve,
human beings are good.
Well, they're good. So you need the good of the family has to be preserved in order to get the thing that can then be degraded into an SS soldier. I mean, that's how evil works. It has to be a privation upon the good. But if you start privating, that's not a word, is it? Depriving. There it is.
There you go.
If you start depriving too early, you get useless children.
Right. So this is, you have to figure out how to order it. And this is, I mean, I'm going to go someplace that's maybe a little bit abstract here, and you can correct me or pull me back to reality if it's too weird. But it seems to me that in the ideal, when we think about human anthropology from the very beginning, from Genesis, that we are made male and female, and then our first initial task is to procreate, is to multiply. That description in Genesis is a description of human nature. Yeah. So what I mean is, it's not like it's just a task that is tacked onto who we are after the fact, but those passages are a description of who human beings are. So what I'm saying is that our procreation in a just society is not for anything other than just being human beings, right?
And I've noticed that when people procreate, usually it's because they're happy.
Yes, so it's simply the pursuit of our end as a human being, which is happiness. And that,
I mean, even the language of flourishing is in the production of fruit. I mean,
exactly.
It's not. I'm not saying like it's the same thing as a tree, giving an apple, but it's more like that than it is like a calculated plan of like deciding.
And so
we're
having it's somewhat analogous, I would say, to the question of why does God create, right? Where we can't position his creation as a means to some other end, because he doesn't have the need for anything. He has no lack. He's self-sufficient. And so the creation is an end in of itself. The creation is simply God loving, right? And I think with the human being, then our creation of children, if fully right, would be analogous to that.
Sure.
Like, we're not doing it for any reason other than to do it.
Right.
Right. And so the injecting of reasons, and that's like the highest functions that we have. That's like us being most perfectly human.
Yeah.
And so the injection of reasons into that calculus is a subordination of our nature to some other end. Right. So we're still loving, and we're still creating children for the children. I mean, I think that's what you're getting at, is that mechanism has to retain that. But now that is now situated within a chain of means towards some other end,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and that can manifest itself negatively in wherein we're not talking about why we're having children, but we start talking about why we're not having children.
Sure.
Right. So maybe the reason we have children is merely to have them, but we don't have them because if we have them now, that doesn't fit into the chain, the sequence of means towards whatever that end is. Whereas if we wait a couple years or whatever, it will.
Yeah.
Or if we have fewer children rather than more, we can fit it into the mechanism.
Right.
And so we can fit in our fundamental humanity into a really dehumanized mechanism.
Yeah. And so just to, I think that wasn't too weird.
Okay. Thank you.
Great job.
Okay.
But to bring it back, I think that then what the tyrant is doing when we talk about the control over human fertility is that insertion of reasons, but where the reasons are very specifically the rewards of the tyrannical regime,
right?
Or the negative reasons are to avoid the punishments of the tyrannical regime. And since we're kind of speaking about our society, I'll do it quickly, but then we'll run back so that it's clear that this is something that's just fundamental to tyranny. It doesn't matter, where it crops up. It's its ugly head. So within our society, it's obviously that we live in a regime where the tyranny's primary, and maybe at this point it's kind of reduced itself to its only reward and punishment is money and the lack thereof. And I don't think it's accidental that the decision, like the prudential decision to have children, or what has become the prudential decision to have children, it's only seen as prudent insofar as it is within the calculus of money means. So
yeah, or they'll use the euphemism of success.
Right. So you don't want to have children too early because you won't succeed. You don't want to have them you don't want to have too many because you
not only will that hurt your success, but their success.
Yeah.
Right.
By which at some point we mean like what class of people they'll be able to enter, the middle class.
Right.
And what kind of college and job
opportunities. And will you be able to accurately obey all the norms that we talked about in an earlier podcast? So will you be able to satisfy the checklist of norms that solidifies your position within the regime?
Yeah, man, this was a while back that we talked about this, but it's abnormal to have a certain higher number of children.
That's right.
That itself is part of the punishment.
That's part of the punishment. And then, so there's a stigma attached to it, which is part of the punishment, but then also the rewards become, you can't, I encountered people who say things like this, we'd love to have more children, but we can't because we can't afford college for them.
Right.
And I'm like, whoa, you have like a 3-year-old and you're thinking about college?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that shows me the way, the full integration into the regime.
Yeah.
Right. Where they've situated their entire life within the reward and punishment structure of the regime.
And to be clear, like, we're not saying that those rewards and punishments aren't real.
They are real.
Like, you will suffer by not being able to put your kids through college.
You'll suffer. Yeah, and that in the sense
relative rewards to the regime.
Yeah.
Because that's what a tyranny is. It's a shrinking of the world to a man-made world.
Right.
But within that man-made world, the rewards and the punishments are real.
Yes.
Okay, now because you had too many kids, you couldn't get all of them to college.
Yeah, it really is the case that your neighbors are going to think you're weird.
Yeah, that does happen.
Yeah. Trust me.
I don't know. I have 2 kids. I'm normal.
You are not normal. And you
So the management of fertility, I think, because when we think of population control, we think immediately of, like, I don't know, maybe one-child policy in China, or something like that.
The sort of just beat over your head, vulgar type. Yeah.
Right. And there is, I don't want to deny that that is worse in some ways. But what the through line between it all is, however the rewards and punishments are administered. Obviously, if you look at America as a democracy that's sort of self-governing and works a lot on like just putting out norms that we're all freely obeying, even though they're a little bit coercive.
Yeah.
Our population control, I think, is fit for our society. That your punishments are lighter for breaking them, whereas in China it's a little more direct.
Right. Yeah.
But the through line, of course, is that fertility has become according to or managed by the rewards and punishments of the state. And by the state, I just mean
the regime.
de facto power. That's
Yeah.
the tyrant.
Yeah.
Say.
Yeah.
So what's interesting to me is when I look back on the ancient world, there's a category of person that we seem to have forgotten about, even though it was as much a part of any tyranny that we would recognize as a tyranny as something like a standing army, and that's the eunuch.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the eunuch was the one who, most fundamentally, it's just someone who's castrated. But what that means is that they are unable to procreate. And sometimes we can think of this as just this bizarre, violent thing that happened. But if you look at any of the, whether Chinese Empire or Syrian Empire, or even within the scriptures, the creation of eunuchs was something participated in by people who wanted the rewards of separating themselves from procreation. What I mean is eunuchs were utilized as administrators within imperial states.
And the reason being that they had no rival loyalties.
Right.
They had no family. They had no children. They had no wife.
Yeah, because whenever we are fruitful and we multiply, by necessity we create these alternative loyalties, these alternative structures of love, of service to the weak, that are risks and dangers.
Because you get into a situation where it's like, I'm serving the interests of the tyrant because I love these other people.
Right.
Whereas the eunuch doesn't have that. Right. In the ideal, the eunuch will be, I'm serving the interests of the tyrant for myself.
Yeah.
Probably. Maybe he comes to love the tyrant.
Because I can't do otherwise.
Because my own self-interest, merely, purely, 100%, not clouded by any sort of love of other, is so it's aligned with the tyrant.
Yes.
The tyrant can deal with that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And families who wanted their children to succeed would often create, I'm thinking specifically of the Chinese Empire here, but it applies elsewhere, would castrate their children
to make them eligible for
service.
Them eligible.
It was a way of moving up.
Right.
Which is just a colloquial way of describing the rewards and punishments of the tyrants.
Right.
That some of those rewards and punishments are accessible through the sacrifice of fertility.
Yeah.
And so what I want to say is, in a way, we are all eunuchs, because no one's castrating us. Well, that's not even true. Largely, no one's castrating us, right?
But lots of okay. Go ahead.
We're gonna let that point stand.
Yeah. Okay. Everyone knows what we're thinking of.
Yeah, but the desire to castrate ourselves, and I just mean the limitation of procreation to, like, within the reward punishment system, is the same thing the eunuchs were always.
It's the same mechanism.
Was all it's the same thing, and you create the kind of ideal participant that gets the most rewards is in fact the one who's most cut off from the possibility of establishing an alternative system of order in and through the family. But that's not actually different, I think, that creation of eunuchs, than our ideal individual within the liberal state. I mean, the ideal, I'm jumping, sorry, but the ideal individual is a eunuch. Now, since we're, for good reasons, mostly Christian reasons, we have a certain abhorrence about, like, coerced castration sometimes. Right. We can miss this.
Seemingly less abhorrence in certain circles.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Anyway,
but we can miss this because we think, well, it's just sort of happenstance that the sort of one who gets the most rewards of the liberal society is, a male who's, between 20 and 30, receiving, who has no ties, who is having sex, of course, but not procreating yet. He's being prudent in that regard. He's the one that's going to get the major rewards of society. Again, this is there is a place for procreation still, for his life later, insofar as it's needed by,
and only for an episode in his life.
Sure.
I mean, I think this is an important point, because with the eunuchs, that mechanism, they do it once and for all, and you're a eunuch for your life. Obviously, there's no way of going back on that. But in our regime, maybe it's more clever, because you can say, behave a functional eunuch, then go through a phase in your life where you have a child or two, but that phase is relatively short. I mean, the kids are had close together if there's more than one of them, and then are in very short order sent off to school, off to the institutions. Everyone's back to work, and there's a brief period in your life, and then before you know it, those kids are gone, and you're back to work again as a fully functional,
you might
non-reproducing person.
If within ancient tyrannies, population was grasped by separating actual people out into a eunuch population and a procreating population, the genius of modernity is to be able to say we've grasped fertility by making one and the same person sometimes a eunuch and sometimes procreating, which allows that person to be totally malleable to propaganda. Because if we need kids, we can turn on the have kids button. Yeah, no, it's serious though. We're gonna I mean, this is what we do, right? We need kids, so we give everybody money if they have a kid, and then wow, people are having kids now. And then if we don't want kids anymore, we can turn that off. Or the propaganda is the same. We can say, parenting is beautiful, or we can turn that off and say parenting is really a lame. And it's kind of lame.
Children are destroying the
planet.
It's
funny because sometimes there's sometimes people miss the boat on the change. So you'll have like a genre of movies that's like parenting is lame, that kind of went too far into the 2000s, in which it became like no, parenting is beautiful and we need to have kids, and like the children of men, that era of movies where it's like actually no, like fertility is a good, and so there's like this awkward tension. But the point is we can turn a switch on this stuff. The production of a people that are malleable to the punishments and rewards of the tyrant is more fundamental than the particular direction the tyranny needs to go, because those ends can change with circumstance. But what's fundamental is you need to strip people from the creation of alternative sources of order where they're no longer malleable in that way. AKA just having kids because you want to.
Right.
That's not malleable to, whatever propaganda you might use to increase or decrease populations.
No, yeah. In fact, it creates networks of power that are totally beyond the control of the tyrant.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is all very interesting, because I guess at the extreme, and I know we've briefly talked about this before, but maybe it's worth bringing up again, and maybe it gives us a place to kind of even wrap up here, would be just talk about abortion. I think because tyrannical regimes, the killing of infants is more or less a universal outside of Judaism and Christianity, right? I mean, I guess there's a few other examples of certain cultures and religions that don't go for it, but the vast majority do, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, you think about the Old Testament that it was just called the abomination of the nations. Like, well, this is understood to be what nations do.
And of course, in the Greco-Roman world, it's just like routine to the point of being humdrum. Yeah. Right. The killing of infants.
To the point that, not to knock you off track here, that the Christian argument against infanticide, that like exposing your children, wasn't don't kill your children. It was that when you do that, slave traders pick them up and turn them into sex slaves. Right. And then you might be sleeping with your children when you then visit prostitutes.
Right. I've read that.
I know, isn't it wild? That was like the big Christian argument. They didn't even bother being like, hey, don't kill your kids because bad.
But incest had a taboo.
Yeah. They were like, that's fascinating to me.
That is.
If that comes, I feel like that will return in our society in some perverse way. Yeah. We don't need to talk about that right now.
But it just seems like what is happening there in the killing of the children is this extreme manifestation of extending the rewards and punishments of the regime into the very life of the parent-child relationship, the very heart of that alternative society or that alternative ordering.
Right.
So that because of the rewards and punishments, because the children have been just arrayed into a series within the sequence of means towards some end, that their murder becomes like a reasonable thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, it can quite literally be described as convincing mothers to become tyrants.
Right.
And so participating in tyranny and realizing within the family, like sacrificing the order of the family and saying, no, we will take on the order of the society at large, which is a tyranny. Because if what we're saying is true, that tyranny is power used for the sake of private gain, then within an abortion regime, the consideration of abortion is always over and against. It's always private gain over and against the weak.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, of course, like this has to be contextualized with the fact that it's not like the situations are private gain in the sense of like something merely frivolous, right?
No, but if you think about
But
it,
it's still the punishment and rewards of, what are the arguments for? Career,
exactly. That's what I was going to
impossibility
say.
of
That
success.
your freedom, you're
Freedom,
young
yeah.
and you have freedom, and you don't want this will ruin your life. You won't be able to finish college. You won't be able to do this.
All of which may well be true.
All of which are true, probably, as far as like the way the regime is set up. That system of rewards and punishments are really going to operate this way on you.
Yeah.
So the best thing to do is to kill the child.
Yeah.
Right. And that seems like once that becomes a possibility within society, an accepted possibility, then all the children have a little asterisk next to them, right? Like all the children are now children that were deemed compatible with the ends, with the rewards and punishment system, and they were all killable, and so that if you can absolutize that mentality, if you can extend it everywhere, then that goes pretty far towards bringing the family into the tyrannical regime.
Right. And we've described in a few different places the tyranny as the attempt to build a man-made world, right? Because ultimately tyranny is idolatry. It wants to have the society proceed from the hand of man in the way that creation proceeds from the hand of God. It's a lie. Right. It's a ruse, but this is the attempt, which is why we link it right back to the first sin of Adam and Eve. But it's obviously, since it is a lie, the closest you can get is manipulations and destructive sort of creations. And with an abortion, what it allows us to do is say, yeah, all people do in a certain respect come from the hand of man, because at the very beginning of the question of whether they will be born into this world, we've given a choice that is made within the rewards and punishments of a man-made system.
Right.
So insofar as we can do this habitually, we can create a world in which human beings are created by other human beings, and the world is
that's the
man's,
effect.
not God's.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, does this actually work? No, I think it actually has. I think it is the sign of the coming destruction and wrath, because I don't think people are that evil for that long. Maybe I'm an optimist.
No, I think you're right. Although, and especially post Christ, where the alternative is available, right? Like you can understand maybe in the ancient world before the coming of Christianity, why regimes of child sacrifice became fixtures of stability and order. Like why was it that all these pagan regimes mandate child sacrifice?
It's the way that they promised that families wouldn't disturb tyranny.
Yeah, exactly. It has a very, very direct mechanism for the stability of the tyrannies. But now with Christianity as an option, and the church as the preaching against this always, and presenting always presenting grace as a way out, always presenting love as an alternative, I think you're right. I don't think that those sorts of evil regimes last for long. I don't think they can.
And this isn't to take a step back from the intensity, but you can see how within the universalization of the eunuch, you have the same tyrannical mechanism as in the case of abortion, which are obviously part of the same control of fertility that we're calling population control as a whole.
Right.
But in the same way, once you have, like what I think is really interesting is that in states in which you had eunuchs, you also had sort of procreation as being for the state. And what I want to argue is just that these are in some ways one and the same thing. You don't need everyone to sacrifice. In fact, you can't have everyone sacrifice their fertility, right, for the sake of reward. But it's sufficient to have enough of a culturally accepted castration of children in order for all fertility to, again, be a man-made reality. It's no longer the fruitfulness and multiplication of humanity that comes from God. It's the decision of man to have fruitful versus not fruitful human beings. Again, a ruse. We're not really doing this, right? All we can do is destroy.
But it creates the illusion that nature operates at man's leave.
Yes, precisely. Which is why when I say like there's the eunuch society is always universal, this is simply what I mean. Like even in our society, we do have the actual castration of people both whether prisoners, which we do all the time through forced sterilization, or the decision to permanently sterilize oneself, which is very common and suggested to the poor and at an extreme like propaganda rate and give you money to do it.
Right.
That this, while it is true that, we've kind of been able to extract procreation and the lack thereof from one and the same person, that it's the same result that this is now, fertility now comes from the hand of man, which I think we spoke a little bit about when we talked about Babel, right? The man-made city, which becomes what it is because it disobeys the command to be fruitful and multiply. Again, within normal procreative societies in which procreation is what happy people do, when that is allowed to occur, difference naturally occurs.
That's right.
As families get bigger, they create their own cultures. As more families grow together, they create their own communities.
Yep.
As the communities grow and continue to have families without reference to the rewards and punishments of a master society, then that becomes increasingly incomprehensible to another society, except for in relations of love and sharing. Right. Yeah. So
power becomes diffused.
It's diffused. I mean,
culture becomes pluralistic.
We know this, right? Leave people to do what they want, and what happens? Diversity happens.
Yeah, diversity and diffused power, or what the church maybe would call subsidiarity, orders of subsidiarity, and that's really one of the key points here, is that the idea that the family, a functioning family, is an alternative political order, like an alternative to the tyranny. It shows that an order based upon love and an order based upon the power, the use of power for the common good is possible. Right. That it's not a fairy tale, that it's real.
Which is why the family has always been considered that kind of permanent, the one sign of the image of God that just never was scrubbed away by the fall. Right. Because, I mean, you spoke of the inserting a sort of anti-divine reasoning, right? Like calculation within human procreation, where it's no longer what we do because it's who we are. Rather, it's what we do in order to get something or to not lose something, right? Yeah. That becomes, we still are doing what we want to do, but it becomes subordinate, right? But in that, you have a different image of God. Right. What I mean is our primary way of understanding who God is has always, why did God reveal himself as Father? Right. It's through that understanding of who our fathers are.
Someone who gives for no reason. I mean, for no reason of his own.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Like, what do you gain?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I mean, I think there's a paradox. You do gain things, but you gain them in common. So it's...
Well, you only gain them by not doing it for them.
Right.
Otherwise, so it's a paradox.
I think we're becoming too abstract.
Anyway, it's a paradox. Okay.
My point is that there's an image of who God is in human procreation that is distorted to look an awful lot like the tyrant when we have children or don't have children for the sake of private gain. What I mean is our image of God then becomes one in which it's incomprehensible, not in a positive wondering way, but in an actual, like, it doesn't make sense way, that God created us for love, that God created us with no calculus in mind. Right. That becomes increasingly distant, obscure, and increasingly surprising to hear Christians preach it, I think.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. Yeah. Right.
Well, it's all one thing. Yeah. So in our particular society, which we have argued is a tyranny, population control comes through a system of rewards and punishments, and we know this to be the case. And so I do think there's a way in which we can save the argument for having kids that I guess maybe was a bit present in the whole Supreme Court case arguments, but it's that having kids is resistance to tyranny. Right. The point is not that you have kids to resist tyrants. The point is that's just what it is. Being fruitful and multiplying is just a description of how humanity dances out of the control of any particular attempt at monolithic power. Right. So I think people should.
Me too. That's your homework assignment. Have a kid.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks so much for listening. That's population control from New Polity. Have a good one.
Bye.